Good afternoon and welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from the Frontier, and thank you for stopping by. Let me start with some macro thoughts and Tavi Costa. On the 13th of August last year, I said the most important currency to watch right now is the renminbi. We're currently still below 7 at 698.50. Tavi, who's given a tremendous a thread on Twitter, says China on the verge of a currency devaluation. There has never been so many strong reasons for it, he says, and that took me to a comment I wrote in October when China turned 70, and we had that incredible scene at the Tiananmen Square. And I said in conclusion that the world in the 21st century exhibits viral, wildfire and exponential characteristics and feedback loops which only become obvious in hindsight. When I look back, the use of the word viral was kind of prescient. So from last Friday, coronavirus, as C.S. Dickey said on France 24, The World This Week, this is potentially a black swan moment, and that's when currencies come under enormous pressure. I said a non-linear and exponential virus represents the greatest risk to a control machine in point of fact. And that took me to William Burroughs and his Smash the Control Images, Smash the Control Machine. To set the stage, now returning to Tavi, China's credit imbalances dwarf anything ever seen. 400% growth in banking assets since 2008, incomparable to any other major economy. Debt to GDP at levels that precipitated other major global crises, he adds. When a highly indebted EM economy resorts to aggressive easing, it typically leads to a currency crisis. Here are three monetary pedals that China has to the floor today. Significant cuts in RRR for major banks. This has served as a magnet for the renminbi in the last 20 years, he said. Then he compares the fact that the Fed added $400 billion to its balance sheet in 6 months, and just think where the dollar would be in hindsight if they didn't. The PBOC added $380 billion of net OMO injections in just 1 month. He says a shrinking current account adds further downward pressure on a currency. China's current account declined by 8 percentage points since December 2008, and adds Argentina had a similar move over the same period, and the Argentinian currency lost 94% of its value. However, Argentina didn't have $3.2 billion of reserves. I just think the timing of what could be a very dramatic move is difficult to predict. But as Tavi's saying, all the ingredients are there in that cooking pot. Let's turn to home thoughts. Scarface. This is unquestionably the meanest, toughest, wild lion that I know in the world, David Yarrow. Before Man, this is the right title for this congested scene around a watering hole in Savute, Botswana. I needed a vista that could offer depth, and the bank here was perfect, he says. There's some great wildlife documentaries about Savute on YouTube if you're ever interested, but that's such a glorious pre-humankind type photo, isn't it? There is certainly a fin de siècle, even apocalyptic mood afoot. And that time I was saying the conundrum for those who wish to bet on the end of the world is this: however, what would be the point? The world would have ended. Now, Balding's World tweet. So let's put this together. Clear pattern radio bursts at regular intervals and the discovery of a virus in Brazil with never before seen DNA. Are you thinking what I'm thinking, he asks. And this is about mysterious deep space radio burst is sending signals to Earth every 16 days. A mysterious object in the galaxy 500 million light years away is confusing scientists with its signals. It appears to be transmitting signals that reach Earth in a repeating 16-day pattern, but researchers have no idea why. First-time astronomers have detected a reliable pattern in the signals known as fast radio bursts, or FRBs. It's an important step in figuring out where the bursts originate from. Before now, such pulses appeared to be random in timing. That changed when the Canadian Hydrogen Intensity Mapping Experiment Fast Radio Burst Project discovered a repeating pattern. We conclude that this is the first detected periodicity of any kind in an FRB source. The discovery of a 16.35-day periodicity in a repeating FRB source is an important clue to the nature of this object. The first FRB was spotted in 2007, and the signals have mystified scientists ever since. And I went back to Don DeLillo, the specialist, is monitoring data on his mission console when a voice breaks in, a voice that carried with it a strange and unspecifiable poignancy. He checks in with his flight dynamics and conceptual paradigm officers at Colorado Command. We have a deviate tomahawk. We copy, there's a voice. We have gross oscillation here. There's some interference. I've gone redundant, but I'm not sure it's helping. We're clearing an outframe to locate source. Thank you, Colorado. It is probably just selective noise, your negative red on the step function quad. It was a voice, I told them. We have just received an affirm on selective noise. We will correct Tomahawk. In the meantime, advise you to stay redundant. The voice, in contrast to Colorado's metallic pidgin, is a mélange of repartee, laughter and song with a quality of purest, sweetest sadness. Somehow, we're picking up signals from radio programs of 40, 50, 60 years ago. And as I said, it certainly feels like a decade of semiotic arousal, when everything, it seemed, was a sign, a harbinger of some future radical disjuncture or cataclysmic upheaval. Java's Mount Merapi volcano erupted early Thursday morning, sending a plume of smoke thousands of feet into the sky. A wildlife photographer captures the stunning moment. A massive humpback whale breached through the water off the coast of Maui. I'll love you forever, every single day of forever. An 87-year-old man diagnosed with COVID-19 held an infusion bottle to visit his wife, also a patient from the ward next door, and patiently gave her water and food. Assad slams Erdogan's statement that Turkey will strike Syria regime forces anywhere, calls Erdogan's threats empty words, says the Turkish president is detached from reality. Syrian surreality, that moment when the host country Syria, the occupying force the US, and the military supporter Russia, all at loggerheads, meet in the village of Kirbet Omar, east of Kamishli, where villagers tried to stop an American patrol crossing a government checkpoint. It's really quite extraordinary. And frankly, Erdogan is totally illegal inside another sovereign country. The question is, how do the chips fall? Russia seems to be supporting Syria's thrust. Erdogan, of course, purged his army of thousands and thousands of personnel. The question is his army what it was? And then he did exfiltrate some of these jihadists to Libya. So the question is, how many are left? Her Majesty's ambassador in Tehran, Robert Macaire, whom I knew when he was in Nairobi, visited Hassan Rouhani and Javad Zarif on the occasion of the anniversary of the revolution. Of course, he got in a spot of bother a few weeks ago, but seems to have reconciled with the Iranian government. Yesterday, Taiwan Defense Ministry says 3 US Air Force aircraft, including 2 B-52 bombers, flew near Taiwan on Wednesday, and that was in response to a Chinese flyover as well. I wrote a few months ago, I'm sure Xi sees Hong Kong and Taiwan like a virus, and he's looking to impose a quarantine like he has imposed on Xinjiang. In another article, I said, you know, this is running on empty unless you're going to Xinjiang the whole world. And right now, with the quarantine of millions and millions of Chinese, it's as if the Xinjiang model has been re-imported back into China. Gladwell described the tipping point moment in an epidemic when a virus reaches critical mass, the boiling point, the moment on the graph when the line starts to shoot straight upwards. I use that phrase, escape velocity, and have a look at this chart. Coronavirus deaths by date, 13th of January, they reported 1. 20th of January, they reported 6. 27th of January, they reported 106. 3rd of February, 425. 10th of February, 1,016, and today they've reported 1,355. The death toll in China's Hubei province from a coronavirus outbreak leapt by a record 242 on Thursday to 1,310, with a sharp rise in confirmed cases. The rise in the toll more than doubled the prior provincial daily record of 103 set on Monday, while the number of new cases soared by 14,840, also a daily record, to a total of 48,206. The adjustment of the data today proved without doubt that they have had 2 sets of numbers for confirmed infected all along. That was the report Taiwan News put out, do you remember? And it was 10 cents apparently. If that were not the case, the government could not have added so many new cases in one day. A very disturbing aspect of today's new numbers is that the vast majority of new cases accrued to Wuhan. But what if the rest of Hubei province still did not adjust their reporting methods? And there's been a delay in reporting those other areas. Takes me back to the 27th of January when I quoted Groucho Marx, who you're going to believe, me your own or your own eyes. Coronavirus, Professor Neil Ferguson says we're at the early stages of a global pandemic. The point is that the reported numbers are extremely unlikely to be the observed outcome of some exponentially propagating virus interacting with a set of quarantine policies, epsilon theory. And this is the point that I think I've been touching on from the very beginning, that you've got this thing which is exponential and non-linear, and you're reporting it in a linear fashion, and eventually the gap between the reality and what you're reporting becomes so wide that you can't possibly continue in that fashion. And that's why I said the coronavirus, the risks are the non-linearity and exponential risks. Of course, WHO, mounting silence from WHO about what they really think is going on in China is getting deafening. They've suffered from the same problem, essentially. Risk just becoming woohoo organizations at J.C. Reynolds. Harvard Gazette, coronavirus likely now gathering steam. Lipsitch thinks it is just a matter of time before the virus spreads widely internationally, which means nations so far only lightly hit should prepare for its eventual arrival in force. I think now that it's in more countries, even Singapore, which is really good at tracing cases, has found some cases that aren't linked to previous known cases. It's clear that there are probably many cases in countries where we haven't yet found them. For the cutting off of Wuhan, cordon sanitaire is probably a better word for it, because the movement restrictions apply to everybody, not just the exposed people. On severity, estimates are that it's worse than seasonal flu, where about 1 in 1,000 infected cases die, and it's not as bad as SARS, where 8 or 9% of infected cases died. He adds, a couple of things are striking. One is that there are countries that really should be finding cases and haven't yet, like Indonesia and maybe Cambodia, and I would add in the African continent. They are outside the range of uncertainty you would expect, even given variability between countries. So our best guess is that there are undetected cases in those countries. Indonesia said a couple of days ago that it had done 50 tests, but it has a lot of air travel with Wuhan, let alone the rest of China. So 50 tests is not enough to be confident you're catching all the cases. That's one bit of evidence that to me was really striking. Second, I was reading the Wall Street Journal that Singapore had 3 cases so far that were not traced to any other case. Singapore is the opposite of Indonesia in that they have more cases than you would expect based on their travel volume. Probably because they're better at detection. And even they are finding cases that they don't have a source for. That makes me think that many other places do as well. Of course, we're making guesses from limited information, but I think they're pretty likely to be correct guesses given the totality of information. Singapore's DBS Bank evacuated 300 staff from its head office on Wednesday as a precautionary measure following a confirmed coronavirus case at the bank. Why does the curve of the coronavirus cases and fatalities look quadratic and predictable? And this was the mathematical clue in the noise. Typically, total curves follow a linear exponential or semi-log pattern during the upward phase, then saturates like Ebola outbreak in 2014-2015. I go back to William Burroughs, a paranoid who is someone who knows a little of what's going on. Viral Alarm, When Fury Overcomes Fear, an essay by ex-Tsinghua University professor Zhu Zhangru. I spoke about that in yesterday's podcast, but really you should read the source article. It's so powerful. It's just amazing. And such an indictment of this very brittle, hierarchical, imperial structure that Xi's built. And it was never designed to withstand a full-on viral attack. And that's why, I think it's so interesting at the moment. In that article, he also complains about WeChat terror. I've written about Xi Jinping and his algorithmic control. 27th of May, one fell swoop, President Xi Jinping was president for life. The Central Committee of the Communist Party of China proposed to remove the expression that the President and Vice President of the People's Republic of China shall serve no more than 2 consecutive terms from the country's constitution. In one fell swoop, Xi Jinping was president for life. President Xi Jinping is on a pedestal and is faced with the strongman conundrum. The political brand will not permit a retreat, let alone a surrender. 7th of October, on the occasion of China turning 70, I said I would venture that Xi's high water mark is behind him. The world in the 21st century, I wrote, exhibits viral wildfire and exponential characteristics and feedback loops which only become obvious in hindsight. And on that point, to him being on a pedestal, vanity of vanities, says the preacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. There is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of later things yet to be among those who come after. C.S. Dickey, this is really possibly a black swan moment, he said. William Burroughs, smash the control images, smash the control machine. And this is Xi Jinping's control machine, and the virus is going to smash it. As I said, a non-linear and exponential virus represents the greatest risk to a control machine in point of fact. Nuts, amazed Chinese are reporting this. It must be so bad that they're trying to dampen the effects of the real numbers yet to come. Anton Paggi. A lot is to do with the fact that there was no freedom of expression, and when they were being warned, they refused, they shut their ears to what they were hearing, and they put that doctor away and gave him the disease. We now have a name for the 2019 novel coronavirus disease, COVID-19. I'll spell it, COVID-19, COVID-19, said Dr. Tedros. Wall Street Journal, a key issue is who can we trust when we have these outbreaks? It really should be the World Health Organization. China's extraordinary efforts to combat the coronavirus epidemic is actually setting a new standard for outbreak response, said Dr. Tedros. And it's a hard-hitting article, basically, saying what is obvious, that Tedros was way too slow, under the yoke of the Chinese, and didn't stand up when he should have done, and allowed this thing to run away and get out of control. The concerning data out of China accumulated day by day in a way that just felt startling. In fact, the biggest proponent of propaganda in the so-called infodemic has been Dr. Tedros' WHO, in my opinion. So we've hit a very phase shift type moment. Well, in reporting terms, it shifted long before they told us, and this is the further problem, that it's going to be very difficult to put the genie back in the bottle. It's not going to be possible at all, in point of fact. And you know, when you hear 50 cases, those cases are going to become 5,000 and 50,000 in the blink of an eye. Do you remember that research we saw which said it takes 10 weeks once it's seeded in another country before it starts to hit escape velocity? My feelings are for the people in China. I'm seeing videos which are so horrendous, and go back to that essay by that Tsinghua professor. He was demoted for writing something a year and a half ago, but it's so powerful. Let's move on to the currency markets. Euro has been falling away, 108.70. Dollar index topped 99, it's just below it. Japanese yen 109.81, Swiss franc 0.9755, the pound 129.48, the Australian dollar 0.6715, India rupee 71.212, South Korean won 1178.58, the Brazilian real at an all-time low 433, Egyptian pound 15.72, South African rand 14.78 last time I looked, but that could wobble big time. Now, dollar index, this is from Chigo, we're just around the 99 level, and we're probably going to strengthen further, and it just makes me wonder where we would be if the Federal Reserve had not been fire hosing the markets with liquidity. The euro breached key support at 108.79, falling to the lowest since May 2017. It's going to fall further. Deutsche Bank expects Germany to fall into recession after very weak December production data, which is only going to get weaker because they are also affected by that China feedback loop phenomenon, about which I've spoken before. Greek 10-year yields fall below 1% for the first time on record. Greece still has a junk rating from all three major ratings agencies, would you believe? That is really sort of Wizard of Oz stuff, isn't it? Commodity markets, gold about 1573.50. I think you buy it on any dips. It's and particularly if you can get down to 1553, where it did at one point. Crude oil had a kind of a big bounce yesterday on the basis that the virus had crossed its apogee. I see it as a dead cat bounce. We're currently at 51.36. I think Chinese demand is going to absolutely crater, and they haven't dealt with that yet sufficiently. Note that copper isn't rallying as it did in 2017. It's collapsing. That's Tavi Costa. Chinese growth, economic growth, isn't picking up either. It's crumbling. This is not another soft landing. And that goes back to the China EM frontier feedback loop phenomenon, which was positive for the last 2 decades, but has now undergone a trend reversal. And I said, look, this rand is the purest proxy for this phenomenon. African countries heavily dependent on China being the main taker, also at the bleeding edge of this phenomenon, the Zambian kwacha, amongst others, Angolan kwanza. The biggest exposure is actually Congo-Brazzaville. Emerging markets related FX markets are sending warning signals. The Brazilian real is now at its worst level in history. Previous Brazilian real sell-offs have led to renminbi declines. Tavi Costa again, President Bolsonaro, of course, famously said, "You shall know the truth and the truth shall set you free." At that Unga event, he said, "Trails of death and destruction, ideologically infected human souls and biologically perverted children," which I will just leave out there because his intervention, in fact, left me speechless. These are the brand new headquarters of the Tehran Stock Exchange in Iran from M. Wojtal, whom I follow. And of course, the Iranian stock market is the best performing stock market anywhere in the world, which is a plot twist. Sub-Saharan Africa, as of today, Africa is yet to record a positive case of the coronavirus on the continent. All persons under investigation have been tested and cleared, said the Africa CDC. As I said on the 3rd of February, Bole is the epicenter of China-Africa hyper-connectedness. And I tweeted World Health Organization and said, now that you have distributed all this diagnostic equipment across the African continent, that's what they've told us, it would be outstanding if you could consolidate the test results by country, publish them, and tell us every day we've tested 500, we have had 0 instances. If they go quiet, we'll know what's happening. World Bank to lend Uganda $1.9 billion over the next 3 years. The concessional loans for 3 fiscal years starting July 1st are a 46% increase from $1.3 billion in aid for the previous 3-year package. Would like to disperse $500 to $600 million in the next financial year. It's interesting that the World Bank is stepping up in many parts of Africa, and I think they're going to have to step up more because of the retreat I'm expecting off China. Uganda's public debt was $12.6 billion in June, with multilateral lenders, chiefly the World Bank's International Development Association, accounting for 65%, according to the ministry. Uganda has deferred production targets of its 1.4 billion barrels of recoverable oil to 2022-2023. Ethiopia Vote Agency queries key opposition leader Jawar Mohammad's status. They want to establish the citizenship of Jawar Mohammed. He's a member of the Oromo Federalist Congress who gave up his US citizenship so he could participate in Ethiopian elections scheduled for August. He's yet to say what post he'll be seeking. He's obviously got formidable support. Violence last year in Oromia region in the south of the country resulted in the deaths of nearly 90 people after Mohammed said the government had ordered the withdrawal of his security personnel, endangering his life. 14th of October, on the occasion of Abiy winning the Nobel Prize, I said he faces a fiendishly complicated task, fending off the centripetal forces which are tearing Ethiopia apart. Since the 1960s, we have been in an era of locust recession. Is climate change taking us into a new age of mega swarms? The webpage of the FAO makes for fascinating reading. That's Adam Toombs, who I noticed is in Zanzibar. And of course, I've written about the fact that in Kenya we are under a plague of locusts and Al-Shabaab attack. Quoted Exodus 10. If you refuse to let them go, I will bring locusts into your country tomorrow. They will cover the face of the ground so that it cannot be seen. Luke 21:11. There will be great earthquakes and in various places famines and pestilences, and there will be terrors and great signs from heaven. If you look at some of the footage of these swarms of locusts, you tend to reach for the Bible. Revelation, when he opened the sixth seal, I looked, and behold, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth. The full moon became like blood, and the stars of the sky fell to the earth as a fig tree sheds its winter fruit when shaken by a gale. And then it certainly does feel like a decade of semiotic arousal when everything it seemed was a sign, a harbinger of some future radical disjuncture or cataclysmic upheaval. Former President Zuma, known as Mushalozi, have a look at this short video. If it looks like a cult, talks like a cult, lies like a cult, acts like a cult, Key Gaugelo_SAM. South African All Share up 1.16% so far this year. Dollar Rand is actually the purest proxy of that China EM frontier feedback loop phenomenon and targeting 1550. World's best carry trade thrives with Egypt's rate cuts on pause. The Egyptian pound is delivering another strong performance this year following a record appreciation in 2019. That's enticing traders who borrow in currencies where rates are low and invest in the assets of countries where they are high. And Egypt has been the darling of international investors and the destination of the best carry trade in the world for a number of years. The pound is second only to Ghana's cedi this year, with a rise of more than 2% against the dollar. It ended 2019 among the world's top 3 performers, and this year in the top 4 is the Ghana cedi, the Egyptian pound, and the Kenya shilling, which is quite interesting. Here you see pedestrians attending a market in Cairo. That photograph is by Mohammed Shahid via Getty Images. Egyptian pound at 15.72, EGX30 is minus 0.83% this year. Nigerian All Share up 3.86% this year, but it's lost more than half of its early gains in January. Ghana Stock Exchange is down 2.26%. Kenya's liabilities are rising, but at a slower rate. Public debt climbed 1.3% in the 3 months through December, less than half the pace of the previous quarter. That's from Money Academy. Kenya's first cruise ship ferrying high-end tourists will dock in the new $3.5 million world-class cruise ship terminal today. Kenya Ports chairman said the MV Marco Polo will be the first ship to use the world-class terminal. The airport-like facility in Mombasa has duty-free shops, restaurants, conference halls and offices. Of course, the Japanese cruise ship coronavirus cases have climbed to, last time I saw 175, then I think there's been a further increase. I think we're over 200, including a quarantine officer. Those numbers that we hear from the captain over the loudspeaker are terrifying, says Gay Corter, a quarantine passenger on the Diamond Princess cruise ship. So let's keep an eye. I wonder what the nationality of these passengers is. NatBank Trustees and Investment Services has notified clients of the Amana Shilling Fund of an AGM to be held on February the 28th. They, of course, had a very big stake in Nakumatt commercial paper worth $40 million has gone up in a puff of smoke. Nairobi All Shares up 0.33%. The NSE20 is down 2.07% year to date. Thank you.